Do you want to make friends with Indigenous people? If you're someone who's wanting to connect and build relationships with Indigenous people who are already in your life, new to your life, or you've known them for a while but you want to get to know them more, then this video is for you. Hi there, I'm Mallory and I help Indigenous people and allies learn about Indigenous culture and how to live with resilience using Indigenous cultural teachings. In this video, I'll be talking about the 5 most important strategies to help you make friends with Indigenous people, build connections, and support Indigenous people who are already in your life or will be in the future. If you're wanting to make friends with Indigenous people, or at least talk to us, maybe build a connection through starting an initial conversation, you've probably asked yourself one of these questions. Where do I start? How do I go about initiating a conversation? How will I know someone is Indigenous before I begin talking to them? How do I address them appropriately and respectfully? Should I just go to an Indigenous ceremony or a powwow or event? What if I'm not allowed to be there? How can I make sure I don't offend an elder or Indigenous people in general? And how do I know if things are open to non-Indigenous people? It definitely sucks not knowing the answers to these questions. So my goal is by the end of this video, you'll be able to cross those questions off your list and you'll be ready and 100% confident to build some amazing new relationships with Indigenous people. So I've put together 5 of the most important strategies to make friends with Indigenous people, and I've ranked and ordered them from number 5 to the top number 1 strategy that I feel is most important and the most effective way to make significant progress in your relationships with Indigenous people. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with number 5. Now, the 5th strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to understand the difference between someone who has friends who are Indigenous and being an Indigenous ally. Recently, I was searching on Quora and typed in, what is the difference between allies and friends? And I absolutely loved this response that someone gave. Friends help support you whenever you are down and whenever you want to achieve something. They don't expect anything from your success. Allies are anyone who supports you to achieve something for mutual benefit. They help you because working with you helps them achieve what they want. After achieving what they want, they may or may not support you again. Friends are people united by bond. Allies are people united by a common cause. So this means that being a friend to Indigenous people means your aim is to support them as an individual and have their back no matter what. Being an ally to Indigenous people means one of your goals should be to support overall truth and reconciliation for Indigenous people and communities as a whole. If you're unfamiliar with what an Indigenous ally is and how to become one, you can do one of the following 3 things. Number 1, watch more of our videos linked in the description below. Watch this video right here on what is an Indigenous ally, or sign up for the training Becoming an Indigenous Ally. You can even find out exactly if you are an Indigenous ally by answering 7 quick questions. I'll link it in the description below. And you can find out what type of ally you are, get exact supports on what to do to be an even better ally for Indigenous people and communities. So now you know the 5th strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to know the difference between being a friend to those who are Indigenous and being an Indigenous ally, which brings us to the next strategy on our list. The 4th strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to be self-aware of when it's more appropriate to be someone's friend or to be an ally. What this means is knowing the difference between when to be someone's friend first or an ally first. This requires us to look deeper into the difference between being a friend and an ally to Indigenous people. Friendship with Indigenous people and allyship are 2 different things, but they're not mutually exclusive, meaning that you can be both a friend and an ally in different situations. In the same sense, You can be an Indigenous ally, but not really have any Indigenous friends yet. And you can have friends who are Indigenous, but you're not really an ally. If you already have Indigenous people in your life, sometimes you're likely wearing the friend hat and other times you're wearing the ally hat. What this means is it's important to be able to judge the situation using your experience with the person, your personal values, and your priorities and your intuition to know when to be a friend and when to be an ally. To help you with this a little more, I'll give you an example. So let's say an Indigenous person in your life is struggling with their own identity and feeling not Native enough or not Indigenous enough. To deal with this, maybe they're putting down other backgrounds and ethnicities in your presence. A friend might support them in this, whereas an ally would maybe try to help them appreciate other backgrounds and ethnicities. And that's super important for truth and reconciliation and healing intergenerational trauma for Indigenous people. So that is what I mean by being self-aware of when it's appropriate to be someone's friend or to be an Indigenous ally and using your judgment on that. Now, what is your opinion on being a friend versus an ally? Do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? Let me know in the comments. So now that's the fourth strategy for making friends with Indigenous people, is knowing when to be a friend or when to be an Indigenous ally. So now moving on to the third strategy. The third strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to not only learn about Indigenous culture, but lean into your own background and culture so that you can appreciate where you come from and identify whichever similarities and differences of your background to that of your new Indigenous friends. What this means is start by learning about your own heritage and cultural background. What is significant to you? And what is it about your personal heritage that you want to explore more? This will really help you when making friends with Indigenous people because you will have something to share about yourself. And if your parents were born in Canada, don't just say, I'm Canadian, my culture is maple syrup. Please don't. Look into where your ancestry is from prior to your parents or your grandparents coming to Canada, and what their original background is. This will open up the person that you're talking to so that they will feel comfortable to share about themselves too. If you want Indigenous people in your life to reflect on their history and culture in order to share it with you, then as an ally or a friend, you have to meet them halfway and do the same thing by reflecting on your background as well. Doing this will naturally allow Indigenous people to emerge in your life. You don't want to just go seeking them out because you can't always recognize when a person is Indigenous or not. All identity is complex, especially Indigenous people's identity, with the history within Canada specifically. So now you know the third strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to reflect on your own background and culture so that you can appreciate where you come from and identify similarities of your background to that of your Indigenous friends. Now moving on to number 2. The second strategy for making friends with Indigenous people is to understand the timeline of the truth, reconciliation, resiliency model and how it affects Indigenous people and Indigenous allies. Truth and reconciliation is a very important topic when it comes to Indigenous people and communities. It's really hard to be an Indigenous ally if you have no knowledge of truth and reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation is really the starting point to becoming an ally, the foundation, if you will. However, it's quite easy to have Indigenous friends and not understand truth and reconciliation at all. Truth and reconciliation of Indigenous people is really, really important. If you want to learn more about this, start with this video right here. We've got tons of videos on truth and reconciliation, and if you want to learn more about those, subscribe or watch this one right here on truth and reconciliation mistakes, as I think you'll find it really helpful. The timeline that I'm talking about with the truth, reconciliation, and resilience model is one that we've created at Tribal Trade Co. to help illustrate the stages of learning about truth and reconciliation of the history of Canada with Indigenous people and reconciling those relationships. I have a full workshop on the truth and reconciliation model and how to use it specifically for allies in the Becoming an Indigenous Ally training. I will link it down in the description below. Now, our first and final strategy. The first strategy, number one, for making friends with Indigenous people is to share your genuine intentions with whoever you're speaking with and put it out into the world, as you will attract exactly whatever energy that you are putting out there. Ask yourself why you want to have friends who are Indigenous, or why you want to improve the relationships with Indigenous people in your life. If being an ally speaks to you more, what do you want to achieve in that? Are you wanting to build relationships with Indigenous people because you're curious of the culture? What is your reasoning? Ask yourself why, and then why that's the reason, and go deeper and deeper. Are you focused on being an Indigenous ally because you have clients or employees or some other kind of professional stakeholder that you need to have a better relationship with or better interactions with? Whatever your intentions are, it's okay, but they need to come from an honest place. They need to come from a genuine place. Once you're clear on your intentions, share that with your friends and family and whoever you respect and see what their response is, if it makes sense to them. This will give you an opportunity to reflect on your own personal ideas and perspectives. I would love to know what your main takeaway is from this video, as well as what your intentions are for being an Indigenous ally or for nurturing friendships with Indigenous people who are already in your life. Please let me know what your intentions are and also what your feedback is, what your thoughts are on this video in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have an amazing day, and we will see you next time.